Okie doke. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to ART 196, Introduction to Designing Web Graphics, Fall 2021. Anyway, today we're going to be working on CSS Basics. On Tuesday, I covered kind of a background, gave you an overview and a background and a little history on HTML. And how that serves as the basic foundation for web design. Over the years, to give you a little bit of history and a background of what CSS is in combination or in conjunction with HTML, is that in the past, everything was in the code was combined together. So if we have, as you see on my screen right now, some basic text, and you can see that it is the font is Verdana and the color is blue. Everything in the beginning of web design was integrated into one page, all of the code, and that's it. And they decided later on that it was getting a bit too cumbersome and awkward to work with. So what they decided is to develop CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So what they wanted to do is to take the content and separate it from the style. And that's what we're doing. We're making them independent of one another so that with style sheets, it will make it much easier and much more efficient to change the look and the appearance of your web page than if it back in the day when you had to do it in all in code view, line by line. So this is where we're going to start today, which is kind of old school. This is what I was talking about. This is formatting in HTML. Now, before I do the lesson though, I need to tell you a little bit about Dreamweaver and how to set up your site for your lessons. Now, what you need to do is, let me go ahead and make sure that I have Dreamweaver selected. And at the very top of the screen here, you're going to see a series of drop-down menus. The one that you need to go to is where it says Site. And what you want to do is you want to create a new site. Now, I've already created my sites, so I'm going to go to Manage Sites. But once you create your new site, you will go here. Okay, so I'm going to go to Manage Sites to show you what I have. And you can see that I have on my website, on my Dreamweaver account, I have a number of sites that I manage. And the one that I'll be using for right now will be the one that I created for the spring of 2021. Okay, so you can name your site whatever you want. Now, when you do so, or actually before you do that, probably what you should do, let me close this for a minute, is that you need to create what is called a root folder. And you can place that, name it whatever you want. You're not restricted to the conventions that I talked about in web design, but it will be a root folder that you will use for all of your lessons. Okay. And then you need to decide or what you will do. Actually, you know what, for your lessons, it's a little bit different. Nix what I just said. You're going to download all of the lessons that I've given you. And for every lesson that we do, you're going to have to use the folder that they provided for us as your root folder. Okay. So every time we do a new lesson, you're going to have to go in and you're going to have to go to Site, Manage Sites, and you're going to have to change the location of the root folder. The root folder in web design contains everything on your website. Unlike working in Illustrator or Photoshop, all of your files are self-contained. So they can be stored anywhere. And on my computer, they're here, there, and everywhere. I'm not a very organized person. So, or at least, I mean, I'm organized for me, but share with you, I try to be a little bit more organized. Anyway, if I look at this says Art 196 Spring 2021. So this is the one that I created for that. So if I double click on that site that I created, there's a couple of things that we need to look at. One, it says local site folder. Now, after you've downloaded all the lessons for our class, site name, again, can be whatever you want. But now what you need to do is you need to link to the folder or the lesson that we're working on. So I'm going to click here. And you can see that I'm linked to lesson 3. When we begin to work on lesson 4, I'll go back to my Dreamweaver lesson files and I'll link to lesson 4. And then we'll link to lesson 5, 6, 7, all the way until we get to lesson 12. So right now I want to make sure that my root folder is linked to lesson 3. Okay. Now, with most websites, you will also, if we go to advanced settings down at the bottom here, we're going to have local info. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to link to a local image folder. Now, for this particular one, for this lesson, we don't need a lesson folder or an image folder, but that's where we would do that. So we would link to the document. We would select the specific image folder. And let's see if I have one in here. I'm going to go ahead and click here. So this is for the image folder. And again, it just says images, but I'm going to go to the lesson 3 folder. Okay. Let's go to lesson 3. And we have images here. Now that's not what I want, I think. I'm going to go back. Let me try again. See, I'm not terribly organized. So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to go inside lesson 3. And I'm going to link to the image folder that they provided for us. And I'm going to click go ahead and save. And I'm good to go. Now, in the future, when we go to publish our lessons, we're going to have to do a little bit more. So let me go back again, and I will cover this again when we get to it. But what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to put in information pertaining to the server. Now, in the past, I used 000webhost.com for our free hosting service, but they charge now. Instead, we're going to use infinityfree.net. And when I double click on here, now you'll see that once you create an account with them, we can use FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol, through them to upload our files to their server, which is basically publishing your website. So this would be where we'd be connecting using FTP. This is the FTP address that they give us. And they will also give you a username and a password that you'll use. And then when you know, once you have that assigned and put in here, we can go ahead and we can test it and see if it connects. So I'm testing right now to see if it works. And you'll see that I have an error here. That's not good. So that could be that something got messed up. Or either they canceled my account or I need to go back and reset it, but we'll do that in the upcoming weeks. Okay, make sure that it works. So that's important, but you don't need to worry about that for now. So I'll go ahead and I'll just save. I'm going to go ahead and save everything and close it. And I'm done. And you'll see that when you have your root folder selected for the specific lesson, that you'll see over to the right when we have files selected and you twirl down under the folder, these are all of the files that are located inside that particular lesson. If you don't see those files, then you have linked to the wrong lesson folder. So if I go, for example, to the very end, this demo, you'll see that we have images that are incorporated in here in this page. You'll also see that we have a style sheet that's been added. And if I click down here, you can see that there's a street, there's Eiffel Tower, there's a box model pane, there's stripes. There's all kinds of stuff that have been added that our page is linked to. So this right now is very important for you to set up a site for yourself and then make sure that you download or copy all the lessons that I provided for you. And if I've messed up any of them, or if somehow they've gotten screwed up, let me know and I will fix them as soon as possible. Okay. So ultimately, when we're done, this is what we're going to do. When we're done with lesson 7, we will have taken from scratch and we will have built a basic structure of our website. If you recall from Tuesday, I told you that there's a basic HTML5 and CSS3 properties of this, that generally speaking, that when you design a website these days, your navigation is at the top. It could be underneath the header of our document or our page, but they've chosen to put it at the top. Okay. And you'll notice that we have some interactivity going on here. We have a hover state, and if I were to click on it, it might go to another page. We also have a header with images in it that we have the little fern image, and we have some stripes in the background. And we've customized the text, and we've used drop shadows and that sort of thing. And then beneath that, we have the main content of our website, or at least the core of where we will place content. We have a left aside and a right aside, and then we have the main article or content in the middle. And then at the very bottom of our website, we always have a footer. So that's the basic structure of a website, that it's broken down into rows and columns. So you can see that the nav is one row, is the first row, and one column. The header is another row, and it is a single column. When we look down to our content here, where we have the asides, it is one row and it is 3 columns. We could have 2 columns, we could have 1 column. And again, because we are using Bootstrap and we'll be creating a responsive website, this is what your website looks like on a large screen. When we view it on, yeah, I haven't changed it yet. So on this one, so we haven't changed it for responsiveness yet. So if I go back to the other page though, the about page, now you'll see. So we've built this content based on that original page. And when I bring it down, and it would be viewed on a tablet, notice that it went from a 3 to a 2 column format. And then if we were to view it on a smartphone, it goes down to a 1 column, and it is structured properly so that we see everything nicely for each of the 3. And the 3 different formats, because in the past, the way web design was done is that it was a very rigid structure and it wasn't responsive. And all it would do is take your page and shrink it down to fit a smaller screen. And it would get so small, it would be nearly impossible to read any of the content or to activate and to navigate through the website. So onwards and upwards. So what I have here in lesson 3 is some basic text. And this is the old school. This is what it would look like if we were formatting it in HTML in the old days. You can see that it has, these are basically lines from Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Hamlet, Shakespeare's play. Anyway, if we are viewing this in split view, okay, and I click in here, let me just highlight click and highlight the text, Rosencrantz, you can see the first line in line 10 here, that how it's formatted. It's all done within this single line. We're using a heading 1 tag so that that specifies that this text is in fact large, and it will use the default settings for an H1. But also note that we are specifying the font in here, and the typeface that we're using is Verdana. We're also specifying the size. We're also specifying the color, all in one line. Now, if we switch to the word Hamlet in the next row, okay, this is line 12, that you have to repeat all of the same thing if you want it to look the same. So as you can probably gather from all of this, that it would get quite cumbersome, especially if you were, had a lot of text and you were going back and you needed to change something, or you needed to troubleshoot, that you would have to go back and change everything line by line by line. So for example, in the top row, let's say instead of blue, I wanted green, or I could also put a hexadecimal number in there. I haven't talked about web safe colors yet, but we can do that. But let me just type in green, and it changes to green. But all the other lines remain intact. If I wanted all of the other H1 tags to be green, I would have to do that line by line by line. If I wanted to change the font, I would have to change it line by line by line. So for example, if I wanted the next one down here, let's change this one. Instead of blue, let's make it red. Once again, I'll change all of them. Let's change the one in here, and instead of Verdana, let's make it Times Roman. So if I put in Times Roman, you can see that it changed, but all the other lines remain intact. Very awkward, very cumbersome. So from about 1995, 96, 97, at the very beginning of web design, this is what you would have to do. It was, a nightmare. Okay. So now what we have, if you want to know what the defaults look like, that if you do not format at all, if you don't specify any colors, any background, or any fonts, this is what all of the default settings look like. If you recall from Tuesday, I talked about heading tags. They're an important part of HTML. They are part of the syntax that's used, and they do have specific meaning, in the sense that an H1 tag is generally reserved for one or two things on a page, and it will specify to a person who has who has impaired sight, when the reader reads their page to them, that this is of importance. And then heading 2 tags would be less important, all the way down to a P tag, which is for the kind of the general content of your page. Now, I almost rarely ever use an H6 tag. The smallest one that I've ever used is a heading 3. I don't know why you would use heading 4, 5, or 6, but typically use H1 and H2 an awful lot, occasionally H3, paragraph tags. And I showed you the other day an unordered list. Unordered lists are used all the time. Typically because in web design, content is short, it's to the point. It's not a place where you publish a 10,000 word essay. Everything is generally broken down into kind of pithy bullet points, and that's what list items do, especially unordered lists. So this is what it looks like, a page looks like if you don't specify anything at all. It is the default HTML, the default HTML. So it's not that it's unformatted, it reverts to the default format. Okay. Now, the other thing that you should be aware of with HTML, and also just to let you know too, let me talk about headings for a minute and headers in the head of the document. So I talked about it so as not to get confused, and I hope I don't confuse you more, is that if you recall when we were looking at HTML, the head of your document has an opening and closing tag. That's where you put the title. If you have a linked style sheet, you would put that there. If you have, what else could you have? You could have any number of things. You could have JavaScript. You could have all sorts of things that could go in here that when I used that sandwich analogy, that this would be the condiments where you would put that. Okay, so that's the head of the document. Headings, on the other hand, refer to the syntax that's used for the size, generally the size and the importance of the text that you, of your content. And it goes from an H1 to an H6. H1 is the most important element on your page. 6 and H6, should you choose to use that, would be the least important. It would be very similar to if you were outlining a term paper, and you would have Roman numeral 1, that would be the most important. And then underneath that, instead of Roman numerals, then you go to capital letters A, B, and C. They would be a little bit less important, and content underneath the Roman numerals. And then after that, you would have numerals again, 1, 2, and 3, that would make it even less important. That's similar to the structure that we're using here. So the syntax is important with regard to headings. So we have the head of our document, we have headings, and then as I showed you in our about page, this area up here, all in green and where it says green start, is called the header of your document. And in HTML5, we do have a tag for that, header. Remember, we have a nav tag, we have a header tag, we have article tags, we have aside tags, and we have footer tags. Those are all part of HTML5. So we have headers, headings, and head, not to be confused with one another. They all do slightly different things. Any questions so far? No? So when we are using CSS, there are a number of things that are going to be defaults. We have a number of defaults. I pointed out the color of the text. I pointed at which would be black. The background is white. The font is Times Roman. Other defaults that you will find for CSS will be found on page 70 in your textbook. Now, the goal is when you're designing a website that no matter what browser renders your page, it looks the same. That is the goal. Right now, Chrome dominates the browsers. It's probably over 70% of people use Google Chrome. Next to that would be Firefox. Internet Explorer comes into a third place, and then Safari, Opera, and then I guess there are a handful of others. My preference is Firefox over Chrome, just to let you know. It's open source, it's there's no non-proprietary, it's not owned by anybody. And then because I'm a Mac user, I use Safari quite a bit as well. but it's up to you. The goal is when, as I said, when you're designing a website, that you want to make sure that your web page looks the same, no matter what browser the end user is using or what version of the browser the end user is using. So there's lots of variables to take into consideration. Okie doke. Now, the next thing that we need to concern ourselves with CSS is that there's something called, it uses what is called a box model. Think of it this way. Every element that you put on your page can be defined or can be wrapped in a box. Now, if you look at page, here, let me do this. Let me go all the way back here and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. It should be in here. Maybe it was in here. No. Nope, it's here. I thought it was, there was an example here for the box model. Let me open this one. See if this is it. Yeah, this is the page that I wanted. Here we go. So here is your box model. Let me see if I can't enlarge this a little bit. So you can see it a little bit better. So for example, if we had our H1 tag, and then you can see the little ellipsis in the middle, but that would be some content. That with surrounding that tag, we have what is called padding. Okay, so that padding that surrounds the entire element of on our page, namely in this case, the H1 tag, can be adjusted, the amount of space. We can change it uniformly around it or independently. The top, right, bottom, and left can all be different. Then at the outer edge of the padding, we have what is called the border. The border can be empty. You cannot necessarily see it, or we can add line weight to it. And that can be a solid line, a broken line. It can be a different color. It can be similar to the padding, the top, right, bottom, and left elements to that border can all be different. You can assign, if you wish, only a top and a bottom border, only a left and a right, or a left and a bottom. And they can all be different weights. They can be different colors, whatever you want. And then the space outside that border is called the margin. So it will be, the margin is the space that pushes it away or separates it from other elements. And again, they can all be independent of one another. The top, right, bottom, and left can be the same, can be uniform distance all the way around, or they can be different, individually different. So that's what that is, okay? That's the box model that we're using. So if I come back over here to this box model, you can see that they've written some code for us. And if we look in the head of the document, we can see that they put the styles, the CSS styles, in the head of the document. Now, when you're using CSS, it can be placed three different ways. It can be inline, which is kind of rarely done these days. And then it can be embedded in the file itself. And if it is embedded in the file, then it would be in the head of the document, which is what they've done here. And you can see that what we have here, we have in the head of the document, we have an opening tag, style, type, text, /CSS, and there's the closing tag for style. And you can see that they have specific classes for an H1 tag, a paragraph tag, box model for strong, meaning bold, and a box model for italic, which is the emphasis that I talked about the other day. We have all of these attributes that have been assigned to all of them. We have a border, we have a margin, we have padding, we have the width of the box itself, the background color, and so on and so forth. Now, the thing that makes CSS work really nicely or really well is that if we change one of these elements, everything else will change. So for example, if I decide that I want the entire width of my my elements here, instead of to be, let's see, instead to be, what is it right now? I said it was 550 pixels. What if I said I wanted it to be 700 pixels? So I'll put in 700. Notice how it stretched everything out to fit. So it can be in pixels or it can be in percentages. That's something else that will get get adjusted to. I can also adjust the margins. So maybe if the margins, remember I said, is the space around each of these elements. So instead of 5 pixels, maybe I want each of these elements to be spaced farther apart. So I can go ahead, instead of 5 pixels, let's make it 20 pixels. Now you can see that everything is pushed farther apart. Okay. Border weight right now is solid in blue. Well, maybe I want it to be yellow. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type in here yellow. Now it's changed to yellow. It doesn't read very well, or maybe instead I want it to be black. So if I use a hexadecimal number, if I go ahead and I put in, oh shoot, where is it? Well, I'll just put in black. There we go. So I've changed that there. So that's just for the border color. If I want the border, right now it's 20 pixels. That can't be right. Oh, that's the margin. Never mind. Padding, as you said, as I see here, is 5 pixels. If I want it to be maybe 10 pixels, notice that it, whoops, I'm going to make it 20 pixels as well. Whoops. There we go. Now it's working. I had too many spaces there. And the same here for the margins. So as I said, it can really change things considerably. Just by being off, by 1 space or 2. We can see the color of the type is white. If I said instead, if I want that to be yellow or another color, we can do that, yellow. But as we were looking at when everything was done in kind of old school line by line, what makes this helpful now is that when you change one, everything changes. Now you can be specific, not everything has to change. You can use, make things uniquely different. I could make, if I wanted to, each one of these different, but I would have to set up my separate styles for them. And there are ways that we will be doing that later on in the semester. So to explain briefly, if I can, CSS stands for cascading style sheet. So what is a cascading? It uses what is called an inheritance theory, meaning that if whatever you use at the very beginning and assign to your text, for example, and if you specify that you're using Well, for example, right now we don't have, I don't see in here, but we have specified. Let's go ahead and I'm going to put in here and see if I can't put in font. So I'm going to go ahead here and put in font because it's defaulting to the Times Roman. And I'll put in Verdana. Let's see if it changes it. No. No, I'm not using the right syntax. So it's not helping me here. So again, even though I want to change it, I'm not using the right syntax. So I have to go back and think about that for a minute to change it. But right now it's reverting to the default Times Roman. So if you don't specify anything, it's going to revert to the defaults. If you do specify something, everything subsequent to that will inherit it unless you specify something different. So for example, let's see, let me go on here. I'm going to go into the source code here. There was an example in here that I've lost. Anyway, they're basically, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, because we have the inheritance theory, which means that, again, everything, once you start with a font, for example, and you start with a color of the font, and you start with a size for paragraphs or for H1s, everything subsequent to that will automatically inherit it. Then we have something called the Descendant Theory, which means that we can take it and we can specify and change certain elements of it, but leave others intact. Okay. Then there's the specificity theory, and that's the bottom line of CSS, is that once you, the more specific the rule, and the closer the rule is to the actual object, that it will win over all the others. Okay, so let me see if I can find it real quick before we end today. There was one that I wanted here. I think it was this one. Here we go. So we'll use this one. And I want to show you the inheritance. Here we go. So I didn't put it in the right brackets here. We have paragraph, font family. We have H1 tag. So here we go. So let's say, for example, in the font family, I have color blue for paragraph. Let's use this. We have for the H1, we have color blue, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another one here. I'm going to go ahead and copy the whole thing, and underneath here, I'm going to paste it. But I'm going to specify, instead of blue, I'm going to specify red. Okay, so why did it change to red when I still have the blue one up here? Because this one actually is closer, physically closer on the page to the text itself. That's why it's changing. Now, if I were to go back again, let's just take this first H1 again, all of this. So, by mistake, let's say you duplicate a rule and you're wondering why it isn't working. You might look at the order that it was placed. So I'm going to go ahead again. I'm going to select the blue one now, and I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to put it after the red one now to show you what happens. And now it went back to blue. So if you get, this has to do with the rule of specificity, that the more specific the rule is, that it will dominate over any other rule that you have assigned to it, or any other element on the page that's similar to it. In addition to that, there's also the physical location of it. The rule that is closest to the text itself on the page. And you can see that if right now we have the rules are embedded in the page itself. Now, I told you that there's 3 different ways that we can assign or include CSS. And the first one is that it can be inline, actually, in the line of the text itself. It can also be embedded. This is what we've been using with this particular lesson. But we can also link a style sheet to it. So if I had a style sheet linked to this, and I had one, and then I also had some that are embedded, because the embedded ones are closer to the actual physical text than the linked files. These embedded ones would win out, basically. And if I had any that were inline, because they are closer yet than the ones that are embedded, they would win out over the others. Okay, so that's basically your rules of cascading style sheets. Those are the rules themselves are found on pages 76 and 77 and 78 of the website or your textbook. So in the very end, if we look at one that is fully, let's look and see if we have, these are the files. Let's see if we have the CSS. Here's our linked style sheet. Let's see if we have, if these are all in line or not, or embedded. I can't remember. It is a linked CSS, I believe, style sheet. So watch what happens when I remove, and this is what happens when you, the linking gets messed up. That you can see over here that if I switch to CSS Designer, we have all sources here, and you can see that we have linked CSS. That's what's in here. If I hit the minus and I remove it, watch what happens to the text. Come on. Not a thing, because I thought it was linked, and maybe it wasn't. So let me undo that. I goofed. I thought for sure that was all linked in here. So let me look in the head of the document instead of all. No, all the styles are in here. My mistake. But let's do it a different way. Let's use the examples that we're going to use in future lessons, and then that will be much easier. So in here, because this is where we're going to actually work rather than use theirs, is that if we look at all sources in the CSS tab, you can see that we have Bootstrap Css. That enables us to create, more often than not, the responsive part of our website, and to create some pretty fancy nav bars, among other things. That CSS you do not edit, never, never, never. And usually it's locked. You can see that we have the green styles CSS here. Now, this will be one of the last things that I do, because if I screw it up, you'll see, I'll try to undo it and make sure that it works. So right now it's the green style CSS that are determining the colors, the fonts, the padding, the margins of everything that I have on my page. If I were to take the green style CSS and I were to remove it, this is what it would look like with unstyled. It still has the basic structure that we're using from the Bootstrap CSS, but all the colors, the images that we use and that sort of thing have been stripped away. So if I hit Command Z to bring that back, now it brought back the style that is linked to it. Likewise, the Bootstrap CSS that provides the basic structure for our page and, styling as well. If I were to remove it, now watch what happens. Okay, that nav bar, that nice nav bar that we had goes away. The 3 columns that we had goes away. The images are still there from the way that we styled it and the colors, but it doesn't look the same. It just, the content is there, but the styling is gone. If I were to remove both of them, and this will happen sometimes to you. So let me go ahead and remove Bootstrap and remove the green styles CSS. This is what a page looks like, completely unstyled. Here's our nav bar up here. We have the links. This was the title of our page in the header, green start, green awareness and action. And this is where we had our main heading, our subheading, and we had our sidebars. And then at the very bottom is what we had for our footer. So you can see that how much web design has really changed over the years. A lot. It's become really extremely rich, robust, and complicated, by the way. And lots of room for mistakes, So I undid it a couple of times. And you can see going from a very basic website to something that we have, where we've added CSS, some really nice styling here, multiple background elements, asides, new fonts, rather than some of the old standard ones. It can be really quite nice. So anyway, that's an introduction to CSS. That's pretty much all the time we have for today. What we're going to do next Tuesday is we're going to cover some web design basics. I also want to introduce to all of you Wix. So over the weekend, if you would like to, while we're working on the lessons and we're building our website from the ground up, using Bootstrap to build the basic structure, structure of our page, and then begin to style it, I'm going to want you to create an account with Wix.com. Wix is an online editing website that you can use for free. This is the one that I have here, that I have created. And let's see. Let me go to my site so you can see the one that I did here. Once you do that, we're going to go over this a little bit next week ourselves, so that you can pick from any number of templates that they provide for you and give you the option. And then they have any number of online editing tools to do that. So we're going to do that. And I'll get you started with it. There really are no instructions for this, so I'm going to let you struggle on your own for the most part. But if I click here to show you what I did, what I want you to do is to create a page, or at least maybe 3 pages, preferably 4. But this is the one that I'm using. Here's my home page. And if I go to my About page, it gives a little bit about me, and it's a little bit too cumbersome with that background. And then I have a resume page, and then I have a portfolio page, and then I have a contact page. Okay. Now, using all of their, their templates, their elements, this is what I've used here. Okay. So this is the one from that account that I've created. So I want you to create an account with Wix, and we will go over it, and I'll create another new account myself next week, and we'll begin to build something from scratch again together. Okay. Before we end today, do you have any questions for me about HTML or CSS or Dreamweaver setting up your account, or not your account, but your site for the lessons that you'll be doing? And then for any other website that you create, the final website, which will be done in Dreamweaver, you'll have to create a separate site. The Mobirise one, you can create a separate site for it. And then that will be it. Any questions before we leave today? Yes, no? Let me go ahead and pause. So before we leave today, you guys are free to leave, but remember that you need to complete the optimize for web images and put that on our shared Google Drive. I also, over the weekend, want you to create a Wix account, and we'll start that as well. And we're also going to work on lesson 4 and 5 starting next week, and probably begin working on lesson 6. Okay, so if that's it, I'll say goodbye for today. Have a good weekend. And I hope this isn't too confusing for all of you. As long as I've been doing it, some of it still gets a little overwhelming for me. There's a lot to learn about, because web pages are not independent. They're not standalone. They're always linked to something else, linked to a style sheet, images are linked to your root folder. They're all, nothing is a standalone like it is with Illustrator or Photoshop. They don't function independent of one another. There's always linked and intertwined with one another. Okay, so I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll stop recording. And when you guys have left, I'll end my Zoom meeting.